Welcome back, everyone. You made it through episode 0. That's good to know. This is going to be episode 1 of the C++ training series, the intro to C++ training series, that is. And basically, we've already gotten through the basic setup. So now what we can do is we can go ahead and get started. Right here, we're just going to pick up right where we left off. So we're inside of Visual Studio, which is going to be our tool of choice for writing C++ code for now and the foreseeable future. And what we're going to do is, first of all, we have to create a new project. So to do that, we're going to go into File, and then New Project. And we've got our different options here, but right now what we're going to do is we're going to create an empty project. We just want to start off with a blank slate so we can learn everything from the basics up to the important stuff, which I guess the basics are important, but that's not important. What we're going to do is we're going to create this project, and we're going to give it a name. You can name it whatever you want. I'm going to call it tutorial series, and then hit OK once you're done naming it. We're going to keep most of the default settings exactly the same. Alright, so now almost nothing has changed, right? Except for over here in the Solution Explorer, we've got we can see our project here. Now, Solution Explorer is going to be your best friend. It's going to be telling you exactly where everything is in relation to each other in the Visual Studio file system. And what we need to do now is we need to create our source file. Our source file is going to be where all of our code is going to go for now. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and click on source file. We're going to right click it and then add a new item. We've got 3 options here by default. We've got the C++ file, our header file, and a C++ class. For now, we're just going to use a C++ file. It's got the extension of .cpp. The name right here is just fine for our case, and we're going to add it to our solution. Now you can see that we have somewhere that we can just type in a whole bunch of stuff, but that was just junk. That's no good. Now, all programs in C++, and I'm pretty sure in almost any other programming language, require what's called an entry point. An entry point is basically going to be where the program looks for first, because in different situations we can have multiple different files. If you've ever looked at the Unreal Engine code, then you'd know that it's spread across hundreds and hundreds of files. So what C++ needs is it needs a way to figure out where to start. And in order to figure out where to start, it needs what's called a main function. Now, a function is something that we're going to go into a little bit more depth in the future, but for now, just know that you can trust what I write here. So our main function looks like this. It's got this specifier called int. It's called main. So this right here after the int part is the function's name. Then after that we've got some open and closed parentheses. In other tutorials you might see that there are different things inside of these parentheses, but for now we're just going to leave them empty. And then after our parentheses we have our brackets right here. So in order to get these squiggly brackets is, on most keyboards I believe, it is right next to the P key, and you hold shift and hit that button, and in Visual Studio it'll automatically give you the open and the close. So that's nice. That's also true with regular parentheses and square brackets. So that's always cool. And once again, some people have the squiggly bracket like up here, but I keep them down here, different from the line that has the name on it. It's just a style preference. You can do it however you like. And now we've got our main function. We can go ahead and try to see if our function runs, or see if our program runs. If we go ahead and click the local Windows debugger, it'll say this project is out of date. Would you like to build it? Yes. And nothing really happened, which is expected because we didn't do much. If you got an error, however, down here, then it's probably because you have set by default a different setting that we're going to go ahead and make sure that you're changed to. So in the tutorial series properties, so you come into project and then your properties, you can see that this window pops up in the Windows SDK version. Now, when I went ahead and installed Visual Studio on a fresh computer just not too long ago, its default Windows SDK version was sent to 8.1. And in episode 0 of the tutorial series, we actually did not download the Windows SDK version 8.1. I would go ahead and recommend that you go ahead and do that by typing in Visual Studio and going to the installer, modifying it so that you can add in the 8.1 if you're going to be doing any Unreal Engine development. But for the sake of these tutorials, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we are switched to version 10 point something. Alright. So we go ahead and click OK. And if we build this time, if you go ahead and build this time, then you should expect to see that it works. It'll say 1 succeeded, 0 failed, and I think that's about it. Alright. Now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about data a little bit, because data is by far the most important component or part to any program. All programs do is basically transform data from one form to another in order to go ahead and let us do things with it, right? And in order to do that, we need to have different data types. So different data have different types. And today we're going to go over just a couple of the most fundamental and important types to know just to get started with programming. And we're going to use these data types to create what are called variables, which are just a way for us to give names to the values that we have. Right, so if I have pi, which is 3.14159-ish, then I want to have the number be associated with something else that I can call easily, right? And in order to do that, we're going to use our data types. The first data type that we're going to introduce is called int. Now, the astute of you will say, yeah, we have an int up here as well. And basically, yes. An integer is going to be basically any whole number value. So -4, 0, 738 is going to be an int value. -4026 is going to be an int value. Basically any whole number within a range. As long as you're not going into billions and billions, then you'll be pretty safe. You'll be pretty fine. So we have an int, and let's just say that I want this data to hold an ammo value. Say we've got a first-person shooter. We're making Titanfall 4, even though 3 hasn't come out. We're making Titanfall 3, and we need to give our player some ammo. So what I'm going to do is int, and after the data type, we're going to type in the name. So ammo is going to be the name of this integer, and it's going to be equal to 3. This player only has 3 ammo right now. You know what? No, I'll be generous. I'll make it 24. He's got 24 rounds, and it's just as easy as that. So we've got int. It's an integer value. Ammo, which is what it's called, is equal to the number 24. Now you'll notice that after 24 I have this semicolon character, which you'll find right next to the L key. The semicolon character is necessary for C++ to recognize that this is the end of the line. So after the semicolon, I'm not doing anything else in this line. So then what I can do is I can make another int. So int player deaths. So deaths is equal to 0. He hasn't died yet. And if I take away the semicolon here, then it's going to say, hey, whoa, hey, I expected a semicolon. So I go ahead and add one back in, and there you go. It's nice to know that we've got a little bit of error checking that we have before we even run this code, which is actually really, really useful and can come in handy. So if I just left the semicolon off and I came all the way down here and I was doing other stuff and writing other things, making my stuff all pretty and fancy, that it will tell us right here that, hey, dude, we expected something to be here that's not here. That's really useful. One thing that we want to emphasize, though, is that when we create our variables, we want our variables to have names that tell us basically what it is. So if I just have deaths, that could mean really anything, and ammo could really mean anything as well. If I want to know how much ammo the player has, I might want to do something like this. So I say player underscore ammo, right? Or player underscore deaths for this. Just so that we can immediately at a glance take a look at it and say, oh, I know what this is and I know what it does. The next type that we're going to go over is the type that you would use to represent pi. Because if you were to go and say int pi is equal to 3.14159, right? Yeah, I mean, like, it technically works, but it's not going to work exactly as we expect it to. So what actually needs to happen is I need it to go ahead and, so like if I go ahead and build it, it'll actually run, but that's not what we want, right? What we need is we need a different variable type, because basically what will happen is when I run this code, it's going to take this 3.14159 and cut all of that off and just make it 3. That's not what we want at all. What we want is we want a different type of data type, and this is going to be called float. Now, it's called floating point, and I don't know really why it's called floating point, but just know that floating point numbers are the ones that we're going to use to represent anything that you do with division, most likely, unless it obviously, so 24 divided by 6 is going to be an int, right? Because 24 divided by 6 is just 4. 24 divided by 5, however, is in between 4 and 6, right? It's like 5 point something. So anything that we have there is going to be a float. You can actually also make floats into integer values. So I have float minutes, right? You can have minutes as a whole number, and this is actually more fine than the other way. But we want to make sure that if our values we want specifically only to be integers, like you don't want half of an ammo value, right? You don't want half of a death. That doesn't really make sense. So you're going to want to make sure that that variable is an int, and the ones that you want to be floating point are going to be floating point. And the last data type that we're going to go over is going to be what's called the Boolean. Now, Boolean basically is just, it's going to be the most simple one that we can look at right now. And the way that we type it is it's just bool, so bool. And I'm gonna give it a variable name, and I'm gonna call it bool blah blah blah. And Boolean values can either be true or false. So true, so like if I'm writing, Titanfall 3, for example, like we said earlier, and if I want to know if the player can fire his weapon or if the player can grapple, how about that? I will write, say, player can grapple. And if player can grapple is true, then I'll be able to grapple. But if it's false, then not. And we'll go over how to actually incorporate this logic later on. But this is one of the most important. So these three right here are the most important data types that we use in basic day-to-day programming. And just to go over everything once again, we created a project. Then we created a source file. We created a main function. And we went over integers, floating point, and Boolean. Integers are whole numbers. Floating point is everything except whole numbers. And then Boolean is true and false. And that'll wrap up everything today. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns for me, then let me know in the description down below or tweet at me at notfromegypt. Okay, and that'll be it for me, and I will see you next week.